The courtroom was silent, but not in a calm, orderly way. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting to explode, heavy with tension. The gallery was packed, family members, neighbors, reporters with cameras perched on every ledge, and curious citizens who had followed the trial for weeks. Everyone had been anticipating this moment. The final witness, a 6-year-old girl named Amelia Brooks, was about to testify. She sat in the back row, her small frame almost swallowed by the hard wooden chair. In her hands, she gripped a worn stuffed rabbit, its faded fur a testament to nights of whispered secrets and clutched comfort. Amelia's Aunt Margaret sat beside her, her hand lightly resting on the girl's knee. Margaret had spent the morning rehearsing, reminding Amelia to be calm, to answer only what she was asked, to let the lawyers handle the courtroom theatrics. "You're brave, Amelia," Margaret whispered. "Just keep breathing." But Amelia barely nodded, her attention drawn elsewhere. She wasn't looking at the judge, the lawyers, or the jury. She was staring at the side door, where a massive German shepherd was about to enter the courtroom. The dog's name was Ranger. He was a police K-9 trained in narcotics detection, search and rescue, and officer protection. To most, he was just part of the law enforcement team, another tool in a complicated, high-profile case. But to Amelia, he was different. Something in the air shifted when Ranger stepped in. The dog's dark, intelligent eyes scanned the room and then stopped, locking on something or someone at the very back. Amelia's stomach twisted, and she could feel her heartbeat echoing in her chest. She had known Ranger before. Not in a casual way, she had known him intimately, as a partner to her father. Her father, Officer Daniel Brooks, had been a decorated police officer who had died 8 months earlier in a warehouse fire during a raid gone wrong. Ranger had been Daniel's partner, his loyal companion through countless operations, his shadow in and out of uniform. Everyone had assumed Ranger had been reassigned after Daniel's death, but here he was, alive, alert, and entering the room with the authority only a well-trained K-9 could command. Amelia's hand trembled as she tightened her grip on the stuffed rabbit. Her aunt tried to hold her hand to offer a grounding presence, but Amelia felt compelled to move. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her seat. The spectators in the gallery noticed the motion almost simultaneously, an unnatural stillness, a child daring to move in a room full of adults. Whispered murmurs erupted. Some tried to sit straighter, others leaned forward, curious about what the girl could possibly be doing. And then it happened. Amelia pointed. Her little finger wavered slightly as her arm extended, but her eyes were fixed and unwavering. "Ranger," she whispered, just loud enough for the nearest juror to hear. The courtroom froze. The judge, Judge Harper, mid-sentence of addressing the prosecutor, stopped abruptly. Her gavel hovered above the desk. The prosecuting attorney, David Lewis, blinked, pen still in hand. Even the defendant, a man known for his cold, stoic demeanor, stiffened in his seat. Ranger stopped mid-step, his ears twitched, his body went rigid, his eyes locked on Amelia. The handler tried to adjust his pace, calling the dog's name, but Ranger did not respond. Not yet. He was transfixed. The gallery went silent. Phones hovered in midair, reporters realizing they were witnessing something unexpected. The tension in the room thickened, nearly palpable like the air before a thunderstorm. Even the stenographer paused for a moment, pen poised above paper, unsure whether to continue recording. Judge Harper leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Young lady," she said gently, her voice a calm but firm anchor in the sudden storm of attention. "Do you recognize this dog?" Amelia's lips parted and she swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened. She hadn't expected to speak. She had been told to stay quiet, but some invisible force had compelled her to stand. He's my daddy's dog," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying the weight of loss, memory, and something unexplainable that made everyone lean closer. The courtroom gasped, and a low murmur spread. Some people exchanged puzzled looks, others shook their heads in disbelief. The handler froze, tension pulling at his shoulders. He had been trained to expect unpredictability in the field, but this was different. K-9s were animals, yes, highly trained, but they did not recognize people in the way humans did, or at least not with this level of emotional precision. Yet Ranger's reaction told a story words couldn't capture. The defendant's eyes widened slightly. The coldness in his stare flickered for a moment. He leaned back, almost imperceptibly, as though the air had shifted beneath his feet. The gallery noticed it, a subtle cue, but no one dared comment. The judge, however, knew that a small gesture like that in a high-stakes trial could mean everything. Ranger let out a low, emotional whine, not threatening, not aggressive, but filled with longing and recognition. The sound echoed across the wood-paneled courtroom, an almost mournful note that resonated deeply with everyone present. Amelia's lips quivered as tears welled up, threatening to spill over. She hadn't anticipated the intensity of this moment. She had only known that Ranger had been her father's partner, and now he was here, alive, and reacting as if he had been waiting for her. Judge Harper slammed her palm on the bench, bringing a sudden hush to the room. "Proceedings are paused," she ordered, her voice firm. The words carried authority, but also an unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding. All eyes turned to Amelia, who now stood trembling, her small frame illuminated by the overhead lights. Margaret rushed to her side, instinctively trying to pull her down to offer comfort, but Amelia's resolve was stronger than her fear. She was drawn to Ranger, to the connection she felt in her chest, something that transcended words or logic. Her whisper, almost a prayer, escaped again. "Daddy." Ranger's ears twitched once more. He stepped forward slightly, the movement controlled, deliberate. The handler reached out, trying to maintain authority, but Ranger ignored him. The dog's entire body language screamed recognition, loyalty, and a hint of urgent warning. The room felt like it had tilted on its axis. For everyone present, the air was thick with suspense, the kind that makes time stretch and hearts pound. The prosecuting attorney, David Lewis, shifted uneasily in his chair. He had seen plenty of oddities in his career, but nothing like this. He had worked on cases with violence, corruption, and deception, but a courtroom moment like this, a 6-year-old child standing alone, commanding attention without uttering a full sentence, causing a trained K-9 to act as if he had just recognized a lost companion, was unprecedented. He felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The defendant leaned forward, his face betraying something close to fear. A small bead of sweat ran down his temple. He had known the dog. He had known Officer Brooks, and suddenly he realized that a key piece of his carefully constructed facade might unravel in front of everyone. Judge Harper took a deep breath. She looked over the room, over the jury, over the sea of eyes fixed on the little girl. This was no ordinary testimony. "Bring the dog closer," she commanded, her voice steady, yet carrying an edge that silenced every whisper. Ranger's handler hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Slowly, cautiously, he allowed Ranger to move a few steps closer to Amelia. The dog's gaze never wavered, eyes dark and intelligent, reflecting a depth of understanding and recognition that stunned every adult in the room. Amelia stepped forward, a little unsteady until she was close enough to reach out. Her tiny hand brushed the dog's fur, and he leaned into her touch, exhaling a long, almost human sigh. The gallery held its collective breath. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every micro-expression, every tiny movement. For the first time, the courtroom was united in silence, witnessing something deeply personal yet undeniably public, something that transcended ordinary law and procedure. Judge Harper's eyes softened. "This changes things," she murmured under her breath, almost to herself, as she signaled the bailiff to pause all proceedings. She knew the trial's trajectory had shifted in an instant. The child's presence, the dog's reaction, the raw emotion. It was no longer just a legal case. Something much larger, far more profound, had entered the room. And as Amelia whispered once more, barely audible but impossibly clear, "I remember," the entire courtroom leaned in. Everyone, from jurors to reporters, from family members to strangers in the gallery, felt a shiver of anticipation. What would she remember? What truth was about to unfold? And why did Ranger react as if the memory of that night, and of Officer Brooks himself, was imprinted deep within him, waiting for this very moment to resurface? The judge's gavel hovered, suspended in midair, as the room collectively held its breath. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, but inside, time itself seemed to stretch. Every eye was fixed on Amelia, the little girl who had turned the courtroom upside down with a point, a whisper, and a glance. And in that silence, heavy, electric, and full of unspoken promises, everyone knew one thing. This trial had just become something no one in that room would ever forget. The courtroom hung on a fragile silence that seemed almost unnatural. The murmurs that had swept through moments ago had evaporated entirely, leaving only the rhythmic sound of Ranger's breathing and the faint creak of wooden benches under shifting weight. Amelia's small hand still rested on Ranger's thick fur, and the dog leaned gently into her touch, his eyes soft but unyielding, as if silently transmitting a message the courtroom couldn't yet understand. Margaret, Amelia's aunt, pressed her lips together and gripped the girl's shoulder, worried that the situation was spiraling beyond control. "Sweetheart, sit down," she whispered, but Amelia didn't move. Something compelled her to stay upright, to face the enormous dog that had once been her father's partner, now standing inches from her. The judge, Judge Harper, adjusted her glasses and leaned forward on the bench. Her expression was stern, yet her eyes betrayed her disbelief. She had presided over countless trials in her career, but never had she encountered a moment like this, where the presence of a 6-year-old and a dog could command a courtroom into silence without a single word being spoken. The K-9 handler, Officer Mark Evans, tugged lightly on Ranger's leash, attempting to guide him back to position. "Ranger, heel," he said firmly, his voice measured but tight. Ranger froze, ears twitching, gaze locked on Amelia. The handler's jaw tightened. "He's supposed to respond to my commands," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. But Ranger ignored him. Not out of disobedience, any professional officer would have recognized that, but as if he knew something essential, something that no human could teach. He let out a soft, low whine that reverberated in the room, a sound laden with recognition, memory, and longing. It was the kind of sound that drew attention without demanding it, yet no one could look away. The prosecuting attorney, David Lewis, shifted uneasily in his chair. Normally composed and in control, he now appeared unmoored. "Your Honor," he began, clearing his throat, but Judge Harper raised her hand. "No, let us observe before speaking," she said softly, though her voice carried authority. Her gaze swept over the jury, the gallery, the defendant, and then back to Amelia and Ranger. There was something undeniably powerful happening here, something that defied ordinary explanation. Amelia took a tentative step forward. Her small boots clicked softly on the polished wood floor. Ranger's tail flicked once, almost imperceptibly, and then he stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing the little girl yet moving with the gentleness of a guardian. Amelia's hand trembled as it reached out, and Ranger leaned further, resting his massive head against her shoulder. The room seemed to inhale collectively, as if the air itself had thickened in response to this union of child and canine. The defendant, a man whose expression had been carved from stone for weeks, now exhibited a flicker of unease. He shifted slightly in his seat, fingers gripping the edge of the table. There was a subtle panic in his eyes, something even the most casual observer could detect. He had known Ranger once, known him well, and in this unexpected, unscripted moment, a truth was dangling dangerously close to the surface, threatening to unravel months of careful preparation. Margaret tried again to pull Amelia down, whispering, "Sweetheart, it's okay, you don't have to do this." But Amelia shook her head. Her lips quivered and her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and determination, held Ranger's gaze. "He remembers," she whispered, so softly it was barely audible. "Daddy taught him." Ranger responded with a deep, throaty growl, not aggressive, not directed at anyone except the weight of truth itself. The courtroom shivered collectively at the sound. Even the reporter in the front row instinctively reached for her notebook, pen poised as if she could transcribe the tension into words fast enough to capture the moment's magnitude. Judge Harper motioned for silence, her gavel tapping lightly against the bench. "Everyone remain calm," she said. "This is highly unusual, but we must proceed with caution." Her gaze, sharp and unyielding, fell on the K9 handler. "Officer Evans, explain why the dog is behaving this way." The handler's throat went dry. "Your Honor, I don't know," he admitted, his voice tight. "Ranger is highly trained, but he's never responded like this to anyone except his previous handler, Officer Brooks." His eyes flicked involuntarily toward the defendant. The room seemed to sense the unspoken connection, a ripple of curiosity and suspicion washing through every person present. The gallery leaned forward, craning their necks for a better view. Everyone's eyes tracked the little girl, watching her connection to Ranger, the bond so tangible it made disbelief irrelevant. Amelia took another step, and Ranger followed without hesitation, keeping pace with her unsteady stride. Judge Harper cleared her throat, trying to reassert control. "Young lady, what are you saying?" she asked gently, leaning down slightly. "Do you recognize this dog?" Amelia swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper, yet impossible to ignore. He's my daddy's dog," she said. The courtroom froze. The words carried weight far beyond their brevity. They were loaded with grief, memory, and the kind of recognition that defied logic. The K9 handler stiffened. Ranger's ears twitched, and he let out another whine, longer this time, almost melodic in its emotional resonance. The jurors exchanged astonished glances. The defendant leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the table, face pale. This small child had just uttered something that made every carefully maintained facade crumble in an instant. The prosecutor's hand trembled slightly as he put down his pen. David Lewis had built his career on precision, facts, and logic. But logic faltered in the face of raw, undeniable emotion, the kind that Ranger and Amelia displayed without words. He looked at the defense attorney, whose face had lost all color, realizing that the courtroom had transformed from a legal battleground into a stage where memory, grief, and truth could speak louder than testimony. Amelia's Aunt Margaret, though relieved that the girl had not broken down, felt her own chest tighten. The courtroom wasn't just reacting to the dog or the child. It was reacting to the invisible threads connecting them to a tragedy, a father lost, and a dog who had survived where few expected him to. The defendant's lawyer began to mutter protests, but Judge Harper silenced him with a wave of her hand. "This is extraordinary," she said firmly, "and we will treat it as such." Her gaze swept the courtroom again, lingering on Amelia. "Child, please remain where you are and continue only if you feel safe." Amelia nodded slightly, swallowing hard. She had rehearsed her words 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared her for this. The intensity of Ranger's gaze, the energy radiating from him, the collective awareness of hundreds of eyes focused solely on her. She felt the gravity of her small voice, realizing that it could shift the balance of the entire trial. Ranger stepped forward again, his massive head lowering to nuzzle against her shoulder. The handler tried to regain control, his hands tense on the leash, but Ranger's focus remained unwavering. The dog's instincts, honed over years of training with her father, overrode every command. His loyalty, his recognition, and the bond he shared with Officer Brooks, and now with Amelia, overpowered the protocols that governed his every move. Judge Harper tapped her gavel lightly, trying to bring order. "All right," she said, her voice firm but calm. "We will pause the proceedings while we determine the relevance and implications of this development." The words carried authority, yet the tension in her tone betrayed her own astonishment. This trial had suddenly evolved into something no legal precedent could fully address. As the courtroom held its collective breath, Amelia whispered once more, almost to herself, "Daddy, he remembers everything." Her words hung in the air, small but infinitely powerful. Ranger's ears twitched, and he let out a long, low growl, protective, alert, and demanding attention. The gallery murmured, the sound rising like a tide, but the judge raised her hand again. Silence fell instantly. Cameras whirred, reporters scribbled furiously, and the defendant slumped slightly in his seat, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Something had just shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. This was no longer just a courtroom drama. It was the collision of memory, loyalty, and revelation, the kind of moment that could rewrite everything the trial had been about. Amelia and Ranger stood at the center of it, a 6-year-old girl and a dog linked by love, loss, and unspoken truths. Judge Harper leaned forward, her gaze locked on Amelia. "Young lady, please tell me what you mean by 'he remembers.'" Amelia's lips quivered. She took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling. He knows who hurt Daddy," she whispered. The courtroom collectively inhaled, every heart skipping a beat. Ranger's growl deepened, almost a warning. Every eye in the room darted between the little girl, the dog, and the defendant. The air was electric, thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that what came next could change the course of the trial, uncover secrets long buried, and reveal a truth that no one had anticipated. And for the first time since the trial began, the defendant looked genuinely afraid. The judge's gavel hovered, suspended in midair, as the entire courtroom leaned in, waiting for the next word. Amelia's small voice, coupled with Ranger's unwavering presence, had captured the attention of everyone in the room. And in that pregnant silence, the courtroom knew one undeniable truth. The story had just begun to unravel. The courtroom had transformed into something unrecognizable. It was no longer just a stage for law and procedure. It was a theater of memory, grief, and the raw power of recognition. Every eye in the room was locked on Amelia and Ranger, as though the bond between a 6-year-old girl and a massive German shepherd could reveal truths that no witness, no document, and no testimony could. Amelia's small chest rose and fell rapidly, her fingers clutching the worn rabbit tighter, grounding herself against the storm of attention. Ranger leaned against her shoulder, his massive head a comforting weight, his dark eyes scanning the room with a precision that made even seasoned law enforcement officers uneasy. Something about his posture, his subtle growls and soft whines, conveyed understanding far beyond human language. He knew. Judge Harper cleared her throat, regaining a fraction of the authority the situation had threatened to strip from her. "Child, can you explain what you mean?" she asked softly, leaning forward. "How do you know this dog belonged to your father?" Amelia's lips quivered. She swallowed, tears threatening to spill, but her voice rang clear, small, yet unstoppable. He remembers my daddy. He never forgot him, not even when they said he was gone. He knew when Daddy was hurt, and he's been looking for me." Her words, innocent yet full of weight, reverberated across the courtroom. The audience collectively inhaled, as if holding their breath in recognition of the extraordinary moment unfolding before them. The K-9 handler, Officer Mark Evans, looked as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He was a professional, trained for chaos, unpredictability, and danger, but this was different. Ranger was responding not as a trained officer but as a companion, a survivor, a witness to a tragedy buried under layers of bureaucratic oversight. "Your Honor, I don't know how this is possible," he admitted, his voice tight with tension. David Lewis, the prosecuting attorney, rubbed his temple trying to process the implications. His mind raced through procedural codes, legal precedents, and evidentiary rules, but logic faltered. This trial had been about a warehouse fire, negligence, and criminal responsibility, but now it had become something deeper, a story of memory, survival, and the unspoken bond between a child and a dog. The defendant, whose composure had been unshakable for weeks, now visibly shifted. His hands gripped the table, knuckles white, as he realized the gravity of the connection between Amelia and Ranger. He had known Ranger. He had known Officer Brooks, and now, with Amelia standing before the dog, the fragile illusion of innocence he had maintained was starting to crack. Judge Harper's gaze sharpened. "Young lady," she said gently yet firmly, Tell us exactly what you remember. Every detail matters." Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, drawing on memories she had tried to suppress. Memories of nights spent listening to her father's stories, the feel of Ranger's fur as he lay next to her bed, and the warnings whispered by her father's voice. "Trust him, he'll protect you." She opened her eyes, wide and serious beyond her years. Daddy didn't die alone," she said. Someone else was there, and Ranger saw everything." The courtroom gasped collectively. Whispers erupted, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras capturing every moment. The jurors leaned forward, riveted. Even the defendant's lawyer looked as if he might faint, realizing the unfolding events could destroy the case they had meticulously prepared. Ranger shifted his weight, low growl rumbling from deep within his chest. He stepped closer to Amelia, nuzzling her small hand, then turned his head slightly, eyes locked on the defendant. The subtle but unmistakable message was clear. Ranger recognized more than a human could explain, and his loyalty to Officer Brooks, and now Amelia, was absolute. Margaret's hand trembled as she tried to comfort Amelia, whispering, "Sweetheart, you're safe." But Amelia barely registered her aunt's words. Her focus was on Ranger, on the shared memory of her father, on the truth that hung thick in the air. "Ranger remembers," she whispered again. "He knows who hurt Daddy and who lied about what happened that night." The K9 handler swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around Ranger's leash, but the dog's focus remained unwavering. He had been trained for obedience, but Ranger's instincts, sharpened by years with Officer Brooks, overrode every command. The courtroom was no longer a legal arena. It was a space where memory, instinct, and loyalty intersected in ways no one could deny. Judge Harper's eyes narrowed. She motioned for silence, commanding the room with authority. "Officer Evans, I need a full report immediately after this session. And you," she said, turning to the defendant, "be prepared to answer questions regarding your knowledge of that night." The defendant's face paled further. He had been expecting a routine cross-examination, not a revelation that could implicate him in a chain of events previously hidden from everyone. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. His eyes kept flicking to Ranger, as if the dog's gaze alone could pierce through lies and pretense. Amelia knelt slightly to meet Ranger at eye level. "He told me everything," she said softly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Daddy's last words, Ranger remembers them. He knows who did it." The courtroom felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just the statement. It was the clarity and certainty in her young voice, reinforced by the unwavering gaze of the dog. David Lewis leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. This was more than testimony. It was evidence, in a way no formal report could capture. The prosecution had been building a case based on circumstantial evidence, fire reports, and witness statements. But here, in the form of a child and a dog, was living proof of something undeniable. Margaret took a step back, shielding Amelia slightly as the courtroom buzzed with tension. She whispered, "Do you understand what's happening?" But Amelia barely heard. Her attention was fixed on Ranger, on the shared knowledge of her father's final hours, and on the need to convey what she knew. Judge Harper's gavel tapped lightly against the bench, calling for order. "Everyone, please remain seated," she commanded. "This is extraordinary, but we will maintain control of the proceedings." Her eyes softened slightly as she looked at Amelia. "You are very brave, young lady. Tell us more." Amelia took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said quietly. "Daddy told Ranger to stay safe, but the fire, someone said it. Daddy, he tried to stop them, and Ranger—" She paused, tears streaking her cheeks, voice breaking. "Ranger saved me." A hush fell over the courtroom. The gravity of her words hung in the air like a thick fog. Even reporters, trained to chase sensational headlines, were silent, sensing the real-life drama unfolding before them. Ranger's low growl rumbled again, almost as if confirming Amelia's statement, reinforcing the truth in ways that no human voice could replicate. The defendant's lawyer rose abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." Judge Harper slammed her gavel, silencing him instantly. "Sit down," she said firmly. "This is not about your objections. This is about truth, and that truth is being presented in a manner no one can ignore." Amelia's gaze shifted briefly to the defendant. She did not flinch, did not shrink back. There was courage in her small frame, the courage of a child who had seen the loss of her father and the betrayal of lies surrounding his death. Ranger's massive body pressed slightly against hers, protective, loyal, and aware of the danger emanating from across the room. The defendant's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the table. His carefully constructed facade was cracking, and the realization that a child and a dog could dismantle it was terrifying. He knew Ranger had been present the night of the fire, knew the dog had witnessed every crucial moment, and now, with Amelia speaking, he faced exposure. Judge Harper exhaled slowly. "Bring in the K-9's records and Officer Brooks' case files," she instructed. "We need to verify the connection immediately." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "But let it be known, no one will question the courage of this child, nor the loyalty of this animal." Amelia whispered again to Ranger, words meant only for him. "It's okay. You can tell them." Ranger's ears twitched, and he gave a single, deliberate bark, a signal of agreement, a silent acknowledgement that he understood the task ahead. The courtroom shivered at the simple sound, the weight of its meaning unmistakable. Margaret knelt beside Amelia, hugging her tightly, whispering reassurances. "You're doing so well," she murmured, her voice quivering. But Amelia's attention remained fixed. She could feel the energy of the room, the weight of history pressing down, and the urgency of what needed to be revealed. The defendant's eyes darted to Ranger repeatedly, fear flickering across his face. He realized, perhaps too late, that a dog and a child had become instruments of revelation, capable of exposing truths that paperwork, testimony, and witnesses had failed to capture. Every instinct he had built to protect himself felt powerless against this silent, emotional jury of one. Judge Harper leaned forward, voice steady but soft. "Young lady, Ranger's behavior is unusual, but it is not without reason. Please tell us everything you remember. Every detail matters." Amelia nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Ranger saw who started the fire," she said softly. "He knows who lied, and he remembers Daddy." The courtroom collectively held its breath. The air was heavy with anticipation, tension, and a sense of revelation that no one had expected. Ranger stepped slightly closer to Amelia, nuzzling her again, as if to say, "We will do this together." And in that charged silence, the courtroom knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no ordinary trial, and what came next would change everything. The courtroom, already thick with tension, seemed to constrict further, as though the very walls were leaning in to witness what was unfolding. Every eye in the room was locked on Amelia and Ranger, the 6-year-old girl and the massive German shepherd who had transformed an ordinary trial into a spectacle of revelation, memory, and raw emotion. Even the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, heavy with the unspoken truth lurking beneath the surface. Amelia knelt slightly to remain at Ranger's level, her small hand still resting on his thick fur. She whispered softly, words only the dog could hear, and Ranger responded with a deliberate tilt of his head, a subtle but unmistakable gesture that conveyed understanding. It was the language of loyalty, memory, and unbroken bonds, an unspoken code Amelia had inherited from her father, Officer Daniel Brooks. The K-9 handler, Officer Mark Evans, had gone pale. He tightened his grip on Ranger's leash, jaw tense, realizing the implications of what was happening. Ranger had been trained to follow commands, to act on cues, to obey hierarchy, but none of that explained the dog's behavior now. Ranger wasn't obeying commands. He was recognizing, remembering, and signaling truths that no human testimony had yet revealed. Judge Harper, normally an unflappable figure of authority, leaned forward on her bench. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Amelia, Ranger, and the defendant. She had seen many trials, many tactics, but nothing like this. The combination of a child's instinctive knowledge and a K-9's trained, yet deeply emotional, responses created a force the courtroom could neither ignore nor control. The defense attorney, Robert Halstead, finally reacted, rising abruptly from his chair. His face, usually composed and self-assured, had drained of color. "Your Honor," he stammered, voice shaking slightly, "this is highly irregular. A dog cannot serve as evidence, nor can a child's memory, especially one so young, be relied upon in this way." Judge Harper fixed him with a piercing stare. "Mr. Halstead," she said firmly, "sit down. This is not a matter of evidence as defined by statute. This is a matter of observation, behavior, and context. You may not like it, but you will respect the proceedings." Halstead's hands trembled slightly as he sank back into his chair. The gallery watched him closely, sensing his growing unease. He had known about Ranger's presence at the scene of Officer Brooks' death, or at least suspected it. But he had never anticipated that a child could trigger the K-9's memory so visibly, so undeniably, in front of the court. Ranger stepped closer to Amelia, his massive frame casting a shadow over her small figure. His eyes were locked on the defendant, cold and unflinching, unblinking in their judgment. The subtle growl that rumbled from his chest was barely audible but charged with authority, recognition, and an unspoken warning. The defendant shifted uneasily, fingers tapping on the table, jaw tightening. For the first time in weeks, the calculated calm he had maintained seemed to crumble. Amelia's lips trembled and tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice rang clear. "He remembers who hurt Daddy," she whispered. The room collectively gasped, the weight of her words hitting everyone at once. Ranger's growl deepened, resonating with the truth she spoke. This was no ordinary courtroom moment. It was a confrontation of memory, instinct, and justice in its rawest form. David Lewis, the prosecuting attorney, leaned forward, pen forgotten in his hand. He was astounded. This testimony, if it could even be called that, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Circumstantial evidence, witness statements, and forensic reports had built a case against the defendant, but the living, breathing presence of Amelia and Ranger was shifting the balance entirely. Logic and law were suddenly powerless in the face of instinct and memory. The defendant's face paled further, and his eyes darted repeatedly between Amelia, Ranger, and the gallery. He had known Officer Brooks, had known Ranger intimately, and had participated in the events leading to the warehouse fire. He realized, perhaps too late, that this seemingly innocent child and her father's loyal dog were about to expose everything. Judge Harper exhaled slowly, regaining composure. "Officer Evans, I need you to remain calm and in control of Ranger," she instructed. "But also, observe his behavior carefully. What is he signaling? Every action may hold relevance." The K-9 handler swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, though the tightness in his voice betrayed his inner tension. Ranger, however, remained focused entirely on the defendant, his massive body tense, ears alert, tail low but rigid, a living instrument of recognition, warning, and silent accusation. Amelia, sensing the shift in the room, whispered again, almost to herself, "He knows, he saw everything." Ranger's growl confirmed her words, deepening, resonating through the courtroom like a pulse. Every juror, every gallery member, every officer present felt it. This was not training. This was memory. This was the revelation of a truth that had been buried, waiting for the right moment and the right witness to surface. Halstead shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. He had anticipated arguments, motions, and cross-examinations, but he had not anticipated this. The collapse of his client's composure, the undeniable behavior of a K-9, and the certainty of a child's testimony rooted not just in words but in instinct, memory, and emotional resonance. Judge Harper's voice rang out, firm and commanding. "Defendant, you will remain seated. No interruptions. Your time will come, but now you will observe and respond truthfully. Do you understand?" The defendant swallowed hard, nodding slightly, but the tension in his jaw and the pallor of his skin betrayed his fear. He knew that Amelia and Ranger were a force beyond manipulation or strategy. For weeks, he had calculated every word, every action, every contingency, yet now, faced with the living testimony of a child and a dog, his plans were unraveling. Amelia knelt fully now, bringing herself to Ranger's level. "Ranger," she whispered softly, "it's time. Tell them." She placed her tiny hand against his massive muzzle, feeling the subtle vibration of his growl. Ranger's response was immediate, a deliberate step forward, his paw tapping twice on the polished floor in a signal that Officer Brooks had trained him to use during emergencies. The gallery gasped. Those familiar with K-9 training understood the significance. That paw tap was a signal of recognition, of truth, of critical importance. Ranger was telling the courtroom without words that he had witnessed, remembered, and could confirm what had occurred that night. Judge Harper leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she observed the dog's movements. "Officer Evans," she said, "document everything. Every step, every gesture, every signal. This is extraordinary but may hold critical relevance to the case at hand." The prosecuting attorney's hands clenched together on the table, knuckles white. This was more than he had ever anticipated. Every legal argument he had planned seemed irrelevant in the face of the living proof before him. Amelia's voice, though small, resonated with clarity and certainty, and Ranger's behavior corroborated her every word. The defendant's breathing became shallow, rapid, almost imperceptibly panicked. He realized that his carefully constructed alibi, the lies he had relied on, and the selective memories he had presented, were now under direct scrutiny from two sources that could not be coerced or intimidated. Amelia's innocence and Ranger's instinct were far more formidable than any witness list, document, or expert testimony. Margaret's hand gripped Amelia's shoulder, steadying her, but Amelia barely noticed. Her focus was absolute. She could feel the weight of the truth, the urgency of revelation, and the responsibility of speaking for her father through the loyal companion he had left behind. Judge Harper's voice rang out again, commanding silence. "Everyone, remain calm. Officer Evans, Ranger's behavior is highly unusual but must be observed. Child, please continue. What else do you recall?" Amelia swallowed hard. Daddy tried to stop it," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Someone set the fire. Ranger saw who lied. He remembers Daddy telling him to protect me. That's why he's here." Her words carried both innocence and authority, truth and revelation, and the courtroom collectively shivered. Ranger's growl deepened once more, vibrating through the polished wood floors and the very air of the courtroom. It was a sound of warning, accusation, and loyalty combined. Every eye tracked the massive dog's movements, sensing the silent communication between him and Amelia, understanding that the dog was no ordinary witness, and the child was no ordinary observer. Halstead's face drained of color. He realized that the trial had shifted irrevocably. The carefully managed narrative he had worked to construct was now crumbling before the eyes of a child and a dog. And worst of all, he knew that this was only the beginning. Ranger's behavior had already communicated something vital, and he feared what would come next. Judge Harper's gavel tapped lightly against the bench. "Let all court staff observe carefully," she said. "This is extraordinary, and we must ensure accuracy and documentation. We will proceed carefully, but the truth must be heard." Amelia whispered again, softly, almost as if speaking to Ranger alone. "It's okay. They need to know." Ranger's ears twitched, and he stepped closer, his massive body protective yet poised for revelation. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. And in that suspended moment, every person present, jurors, gallery members, attorneys, officers, knew one undeniable truth. What Amelia and Ranger had begun to reveal could dismantle everything, expose every hidden lie, and bring justice in a way no one had anticipated. The courtroom had changed. The trial had changed, and the events of that night, buried under fire, fear, and deception, were now poised to surface through the unwavering bond of a child and her father's loyal K-9. The courtroom felt as if it were holding its breath. Every person present, jurors, gallery members, attorneys, and officers, was acutely aware that the ordinary rules of law had been suspended by the extraordinary scene before them. Amelia Brooks, a 6-year-old girl and Ranger, her father's loyal K-9, had upended the trial with a single glance, a whisper, and a set of actions no one could ignore. Amelia knelt beside Ranger, her small hand resting against his thick fur. She drew in a shaky breath, her eyes wide and glistening with tears, yet fierce with determination. "Ranger remembers everything," she whispered softly, almost to herself. But the sound carried across the room and every ear caught it. The jurors leaned forward, spellbound. The defendant, normally impassive, shifted uncomfortably, realizing the gravity of the moment. Ranger's body was tense but calm, his ears pricked, eyes fixed unwaveringly on the defendant. The K-9 handler, Officer Mark Evans, adjusted his grip on the leash, though he understood that Ranger was no longer simply following commands. The dog's instincts, trained and honed over years alongside Officer Brooks, now guided him with purpose and precision. Judge Harper exhaled slowly, regaining composure. "Child," she said, her tone gentle but commanding, "tell the court everything you remember about that night. Every detail is important." Amelia swallowed hard, gathering courage. Her voice was small but unwavering. "Daddy, he went to the warehouse to stop something bad. Someone set the fire on purpose. Ranger saw them. He knew they were lying when they said it was an accident." Her words sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. The prosecutor leaned forward, pensively considering how this unanticipated testimony could impact the case. The defendant's lawyer, Robert Halstead, rose abruptly. "Your Honor, objections. This is inadmissible. A child's recollection, combined with a dog's behavior, this is outside any legal framework." Judge Harper's eyes were sharp, unwavering. "Sit down, Mr. Halstead. This is not about legal technicalities. This is about observation, context, and corroboration. Continue, child." Amelia nodded, though her lip quivered. She glanced at Ranger, who nudged her gently with his massive head, a silent reassurance. "Ranger remembers, he knows who hurt Daddy," she said, and he knows who lied to the police about the fire." Her voice trembled, yet the certainty behind it was undeniable. The defendant shifted in his chair, hands gripping the edge of the table. His calculated composure was crumbling. He realized that the child and the dog before him were far more dangerous to his facade than any witness or piece of evidence he had prepared. Every instinct told him to panic, to intervene, but he remained frozen, captivated and terrified by what was happening. Ranger stepped closer to Amelia, letting out a soft, low growl that resonated through the courtroom. The sound was not aggressive, but it carried a warning, a signal of awareness, and a demand for attention. The jurors and spectators leaned forward, instinctively understanding that the dog's behavior was significant. Ranger was confirming Amelia's account without words. Amelia took a deep breath. "Daddy told Ranger to stay safe," he said. "He said if anything happened, Ranger had to protect me and remember everything. That's why he's here now." Her eyes glistened with tears, yet a steely determination shone through. "He saw who started the fire. He saw who lied. Ranger knows." The courtroom was electric. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked incessantly, and jurors exchanged glances of disbelief and curiosity. The prosecutor, David Lewis, ran his hands through his hair, trying to maintain composure. This testimony, this demonstration of memory and instinct, was something he had never encountered. It could not be discounted, ignored, or manipulated. The defendant's eyes darted between Amelia and Ranger, fear beginning to overtake his usual cold detachment. He realized, finally, that the truth of that night, the fire, the lies, the danger, was being revealed in a way no human testimony could replicate. A child's clarity, a dog's memory, and the unbreakable bond between them had exposed vulnerabilities he could not anticipate. Judge Harper leaned forward on her bench, her gaze intense. "Officer Evans," she said, "document everything. Every gesture, every response, every movement. Ranger's behavior is now part of the official record. Continue observing closely." The K-9 handler nodded, swallowing hard. He had trained Ranger for years, but he had never seen his partner behave like this in a courtroom. Ranger's loyalty, memory, and instinct were beyond training. He was acting as both witness and guardian, conveying truths that no human voice could fully articulate. Amelia took a shaky breath and continued. "I remember Daddy running toward the fire. He yelled at someone. I don't remember their face, but Ranger saw it. He barked and they ran away. Then the fire spread too fast. Daddy told Ranger to protect me and remember, and that's why he's here." Her words caused a ripple of astonishment across the room. The defendant's hands tightened into fists. He realized that Amelia's testimony, amplified by Ranger's behavior, was dismantling his carefully constructed lies. The warehouse fire had been deliberate, and the defendant had assumed that no witness, human or animal, could survive to expose the truth. Now both had emerged. Judge Harper's gavel tapped lightly against the bench. "Let the record reflect the significance of this moment," she said firmly. "Child Ranger, your account is extraordinary. Please continue." Amelia swallowed, fighting back tears. She reached up and touched Ranger's head, feeling the weight of his presence and the memory he carried. "Ranger, tell them what happened. Show them who hurt Daddy." She didn't speak loudly, but her words carried an authority beyond her age. Ranger responded with a deliberate step toward the defendant, paw tapping twice on the polished courtroom floor, a signal Officer Brooks had trained him to use to indicate recognition of danger or a guilty party. The gallery gasped. Those familiar with K-9 signals understood the implication. Ranger had identified the person responsible. The defendant's face went pale, his composure slipping further. The jurors leaned forward, captivated. Every gesture, every step of the dog, every word of the child seemed to converge into a revelation that could not be ignored. Margaret whispered to Amelia, tears in her eyes, "You're doing so well, sweetheart." But Amelia barely noticed. She was focused entirely on Ranger, on the silent communication between them, on the truth that needed to be revealed. Ranger let out another low growl, his massive body shifting slightly, placing himself protectively beside Amelia while continuing to stare at the defendant. It was a silent assertion. This was no longer a game. Justice would not be denied. The courtroom felt the weight of the moment. Every eye was riveted, every breath held, as the culmination of months of investigation and years of loyalty converged in this extraordinary scene. David Lewis, the prosecuting attorney, nodded slowly to himself. This was more than circumstantial evidence. It was corroboration in the rawest, most visceral form. A child and a dog were presenting a narrative that no one could fabricate, no one could manipulate, and no one could ignore. The defendant's attorney finally spoke, his voice quivering. "Your Honor, we need a recess. This is unprecedented. I need to consult my client." Judge Harper's gaze was unwavering. "You will consult, but understand this. The court recognizes the validity of this demonstration. A recess will be granted, but do not expect the court to disregard the observations made here. Child Ranger, you may remain in place." Amelia nodded slightly, though tears streamed freely down her cheeks. Ranger nudged her gently, sensing her emotional exhaustion, yet his posture remained vigilant, protective, and assertive. The courtroom was silent again, the magnitude of what had just occurred sinking into every mind present. The defendant sat back, pale and shaking, finally understanding that the trial had shifted irrevocably. His carefully maintained facade, his lies about the warehouse fire, and the manipulation of evidence were now exposed in the most unconventional, undeniable way, through the eyes and instincts of a child and a dog. Judge Harper exhaled, gavel poised above the bench. Let it be noted in the record, extraordinary events have occurred today. The testimony, the behavior of the K-9, and the child's account have introduced revelations that may alter the course of this trial. Recess is granted. As the room began to stir, whispers filling the air, Amelia whispered to Ranger again softly, "We did it. We're going to tell them." Ranger leaned into her touch, a silent promise that they were united and that the truth would not be silenced. Outside, cameras captured the courthouse steps crowded with reporters. Inside, the courtroom had been irrevocably changed. The trial was no longer a mere legal proceeding. It was a story of memory, loyalty, and justice, unfolding in real time through the eyes of a child and her father's loyal K-9. And as the gavel's final echo faded, one thing was clear to everyone present. The fire, the lies, and the hidden truths were about to be exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom had returned from recess, but the tension in the air was heavier than ever. The whispering and shuffling of papers that usually accompanied a pause in proceedings had vanished entirely. Every eye was fixed on Amelia and Ranger, the 6-year-old girl and the massive German shepherd who had transformed a standard legal proceeding into something beyond comprehension, a living, breathing revelation of truth. The defendant's face, usually composed and guarded, had lost its pall of control. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his fingers trembled as they clutched the table's edge. For the first time in weeks, his calculated calm had been stripped away. He understood with growing dread that the courtroom now bore witness to a narrative he could not manipulate. The memory and loyalty of a dog, combined with the piercing clarity of a child who had lived through loss and fear. Judge Harper cleared her throat, bringing the room into silence. "We will resume proceedings. Child, please continue to describe what you and Ranger remember about that night." Officer Evans maintained full observation of Ranger's behavior. Her gaze swept over the room, landing on the defendant with an intensity that underscored the gravity of the moment. Amelia knelt beside Ranger, her small hand resting on his thick fur. She drew in a shaky breath, voice trembling yet unwavering. "Ranger remembers my daddy running into the fire," she said. "He tried to stop them, the ones who set it on purpose. Ranger saw them hiding things, lying to the police, pretending they didn't do it. Daddy told Ranger to protect me, and Ranger never forgot. He knows everything." The K-9 handler, Officer Mark Evans, nodded subtly, confirming the dog's behavior. Ranger's massive head remained close to Amelia, his ears pricked, eyes locked on the defendant. He growled low in his throat, a warning, a confirmation, and a silent assertion of the truth. The courtroom shivered collectively, sensing the weight of what was happening. The defendant shifted in his chair, hands gripping the edge of the table, jaw tight. His eyes flicked repeatedly between Amelia and Ranger, panic slowly eclipsing his earlier confidence. For weeks, he had maintained a facade of control. Every alibi, every document, every witness had been part of a carefully constructed plan to avoid accountability. Now, a child and a dog were dismantling it effortlessly. Judge Harper's gavel tapped lightly against the bench. "Child, Officer Evans, remain where you are. Defendant, you will remain seated. You may respond when asked, but no interruptions." The authority in her voice cut through the charged atmosphere like a scalpel, slicing through fear and deception alike. Amelia knelt fully, bringing herself to Ranger's level. Her lips quivered, but her gaze was steady. "Ranger, show them who did it," she whispered. Ranger stepped deliberately toward the defendant, his massive paw tapping twice on the polished wood floor, a signal that Officer Brooks had trained him to use to indicate recognition of danger or the presence of guilt. The courtroom gasped collectively. Those familiar with K-9 training understood the gravity of the gesture. Ranger was identifying the person responsible. The defendant's face paled further and his composure began to unravel. The jurors leaned forward, riveted by the unfolding revelation. Every gesture of the dog, every whispered word of the child, carried the weight of truth and memory. David Lewis, The prosecuting attorney tapped his pen nervously against the table. Logic and procedure had guided every argument he had prepared, yet here he faced evidence that defied conventional rules. Circumstantial evidence and witness statements were now secondary to the visceral reality unfolding before him. A child and a dog revealing truths that no one could fabricate. Margaret, Amelia's aunt, gently steadied the girl, whispering softly, "You're doing so well, sweetheart." But Amelia barely registered the words. Her focus was entirely on Ranger, on the silent communication between them, and on the truth that must be conveyed. Ranger growled again, low and deliberate, his massive body shifting slightly to place himself protectively beside Amelia while maintaining unwavering focus on the defendant. The signal was unmistakable. The dog had witnessed the crime, and his memory had remained intact. Every person present felt the intensity of the moment. The courtroom was no longer a venue of legal procedure, but a theater of revelation and justice. The defendant's lawyer rose again, voice quivering. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." Judge Harper's piercing gaze silenced him. "Sit down. You may not interrupt. The court acknowledges that this is extraordinary, but we will proceed. Child, continue." Amelia took a deep breath. "I remember Daddy yelling. He tried to stop the fire, tried to stop them. Ranger saw them hiding something in the warehouse, moving things before the fire spread. He knows who lied when they said it was an accident. Daddy said to remember everything, and Ranger did." Her voice trembled, but there was no doubt in it, no hesitation, no fear of speaking truth. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the most experienced officers, attorneys, and jurors could feel the intensity of the moment. Ranger's behavior, combined with Amelia's unwavering testimony, was breaking down the walls of deception layer by layer. The defendant's face had gone ghostly pale, beads of sweat rolling down his temples. Every instinct screamed panic, yet he remained seated, immobilized by fear and recognition. Judge Harper exhaled slowly, regaining composure. "Officer Evans, continue to document Ranger's behavior. Defendant, the court expects your cooperation and honesty. We will proceed carefully." Ranger stepped forward again, low growl vibrating in his chest. He nudged Amelia gently with his head, then fixed his gaze on the defendant. It was a silent communication of certainty, recognition, and loyalty, proof that the dog had witnessed the events and remembered them vividly. Amelia knelt fully, her voice quivering. "Ranger, tell them everything. Show them what happened." She touched his massive paw, feeling the subtle vibration of his growl. Ranger responded with deliberate movement, circling toward the defendant, then tapping his paw again on the floor. Each motion carried meaning, recognition, warning, and revelation. The gallery murmured, jurors leaned forward, and reporters scribbled furiously. This was more than testimony. It was living, breathing evidence of events that had previously been hidden. The fire, the lies, the deception, all were now exposed in a visceral, undeniable way. David Lewis whispered to himself, recognizing the implications. This was the breakthrough the prosecution had needed, yet they had not anticipated it coming from a child and a dog. Every gesture, every signal, every word was corroborating the narrative of deliberate crime and concealed truth. The defendant's hands trembled. His carefully constructed story, his lies, his alibis, all were crumbling. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that no argument, no document, no witness could counter the unshakable evidence of memory, loyalty, and instinct embodied in Amelia and Ranger. Judge Harper's voice rang out, calm yet firm. "Child, Officer Evans, remain in position. Defendant, you may now respond to the court. Answer honestly." The defendant swallowed hard, his face pale, jaw tight. I don't know what they're saying," he stammered, voice breaking. It wasn't me. I." Ranger growled low, a sound that resonated through the polished floor and the courtroom air. The jurors flinched at its intensity. The dog's growl was not just a sound. It was an accusation, a warning, a confirmation of guilt. The defendant froze, realizing that Ranger's recognition was a verdict he could not escape. Amelia whispered again, softly yet with authority, "He knows, Ranger remembers." Her small hand pressed against the dog's fur, anchoring herself in courage and truth. Ranger's head lowered, nuzzling her gently, as if to reassure her that they were united in the task of revealing justice. The courtroom collectively exhaled. The trial had reached a point beyond conventional law or procedure. The child's memory, the dog's instincts, and the revelations of the warehouse fire had combined to create a force no one could ignore. Judge Harper tapped her gavel lightly, commanding silence. "Let it be noted, extraordinary events have occurred. The behavior of the K-9 and the testimony of the child are being observed and recorded. Defendant, understand that any attempt to mislead the court will be addressed immediately." The defendant's shoulders slumped, eyes darting repeatedly between Amelia, Ranger, and the gallery. For the first time, he realized that his actions, his lies, and his attempts to conceal the truth were unraveling in front of hundreds of witnesses. A child and a dog, innocent, loyal, and unwavering, were dismantling everything he had tried to protect. Ranger stepped slightly closer to Amelia, body poised protectively, eyes still fixed on the defendant. The courtroom felt the tension as though the room itself was holding its breath. The dog's low growl vibrated through the polished floor, carrying weight and clarity, signaling recognition and unwavering loyalty. Amelia whispered softly, "It's okay, Ranger. We're going to tell them everything." Ranger's response was immediate, a deliberate step toward the defendant, paw tapping once more, a silent declaration that the truth was undeniable and justice would not be denied. And in that moment the courtroom understood. The trial had shifted irreversibly. The warehouse fire, the lies, and the hidden truths were no longer abstract concepts. They were alive, embodied in a child's courage and a dog's unwavering memory, poised to expose every deception and bring the truth to light. The courtroom was electric, every heartbeat echoing in the polished wood, every eye riveted on Amelia and Ranger. The trial, which had started as a legal proceeding about a warehouse fire, had transformed into a theater of memory, instinct, and raw emotion. The 6-year-old girl and the massive German shepherd had seized the center stage, revealing truths no human witness had dared to speak. Amelia knelt beside Ranger, her tiny fingers brushing the dog's thick fur. Her chest heaved with emotion, yet her eyes were sharp, determined. She whispered softly, a private communication, and Ranger responded with a subtle nudge of his massive head. In that silent exchange lay the culmination of months of loss, fear, and loyalty, a bond unbroken, a message ready to be revealed. Judge Harper leaned forward, voice calm but authoritative. "Child, Officer Evans, maintain your positions. Defendant, you will answer questions truthfully. Any attempt to mislead the court will have consequences." Her gaze swept over the room, resting briefly on the defendant, who sat rigid, jaw tight, pale as if drained of blood. David Lewis, the prosecuting attorney, had been silent for several minutes, absorbing the scene. He now rose, pen poised. "Defendant," he said, voice steady but sharp, "we have evidence, both witness statements and documentation, suggesting the fire was deliberate. But more importantly, we have the observations of a K-9 trained to recognize criminal activity and the testimony of a child who witnessed critical events. Are you aware of what happened in the warehouse that night?" The defendant swallowed hard, a tremor passing through his body. He looked from Amelia to Ranger, back to the gallery, and then to the judge. For weeks, he had rehearsed answers, crafted alibis, and manipulated timelines. But he hadn't accounted for this. A living, breathing confrontation of memory and instinct that rendered lies powerless. I don't know what you're implying," he stammered, voice shaky, trying to maintain composure but failing. Ranger's low growl rumbled through the courtroom, a visceral counterpoint to his words, signaling recognition and warning. The jurors leaned forward, captivated, as the dog's behavior began to speak louder than the defendant ever could. Amelia's eyes widened, She knew something was happening. The tension in Ranger's posture, the direction of his gaze, the subtle growl vibrating through his chest, it all signaled that the truth was near. "He remembers," she whispered softly, voice trembling yet clear. "Ranger remembers who hurt Daddy. He saw everything." The courtroom gasped collectively. The murmurs of disbelief, curiosity, and awe swirled like a storm. Even seasoned officers and attorneys found themselves held hostage by the scene. Ranger, a K-9 trained to follow commands, was now a living witness, and Amelia, small and fragile yet fierce, was the interpreter of his memories. Judge Harper's voice cut through the charged atmosphere. "Child, continue. Officer Evans, ensure the record captures every gesture and behavior. Defendant, answer honestly or face the court's judgment." Amelia swallowed, glancing briefly at her Aunt Margaret for support, then at Ranger. "Ranger saw them hiding things," she whispered. They moved boxes, papers, and containers before the fire. Daddy tried to stop them, but they didn't care. Daddy told Ranger to protect me and remember everything. That's why he's here. He knows the truth." Ranger shifted slightly, stepping closer to Amelia while keeping his eyes locked on the defendant. His body language was unmistakable: recognition, loyalty, and silent accusation. The K-9 handler's jaw tightened. He had trained Ranger for years, but he had never witnessed behavior this unequivocal in a courtroom. The dog was not acting on command. He was acting on memory and instinct. The defendant's hands gripped the table. Panic flickered in his eyes. His lips quivered as he attempted to respond, but every syllable felt inadequate. I didn't. It wasn't me, Ranger growled again, low and deliberate. The sound reverberated across the polished wood, penetrating the room. It was not aggression. It was accusation, recognition, and affirmation. Every juror, every officer, every person in that courtroom instinctively understood. The dog knew the truth, and it implicated the defendant. Judge Harper leaned forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Defendant, this court will allow no further deception. You have been presented with the testimony of a child and the behavior of a K-9 trained to recognize criminal activity. You may now explain your actions truthfully." The defendant's face drained of color. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Beads of sweat rolled down his temples. His fingers twitched nervously. For weeks, he had believed that he could manipulate evidence, mislead investigators, and escape accountability. Now, confronted by innocence, memory, and instinct, he was powerless. Finally, his shoulders slumped. His voice broke as he spoke, trembling. I didn't mean I thought I could stop it. I didn't. Amelia's small voice rang out, unwavering. "Ranger knows," she said. "He saw what you did. You lied. You set the fire. Daddy tried to stop you, and Ranger remembers." The courtroom gasped again. Ranger stepped deliberately forward, paw tapping twice on the floor, a trained signal of recognition, danger, and guilt. The defendant's eyes widened in terror as he realized the full weight of the dog's behavior. There was no escaping it. Every instinct in Ranger's body, every memory, every learned response from Officer Brooks was testifying against him in a way words could not. David Lewis rose, voice steady but urgent. "Your Honor, the combination of the child's testimony and the K-9's behavior provides a level of corroboration that is extraordinary. This is more than observation. It is a living, breathing account of the crime, its perpetrators, and its consequences." Judge Harper nodded, her expression grave. "It is indeed extraordinary. Officer Evans, ensure every movement, every gesture, every signal from Ranger is fully documented. Child, your testimony has been courageous. The court acknowledges your bravery." Margaret reached over, gently squeezing Amelia's shoulder. "You're amazing, sweetheart," she whispered, but Amelia barely registered it. Her attention remained on Ranger and the defendant. The bond between the child and the dog had revealed the hidden truth. The warehouse fire had been deliberate, the lies were exposed, and the perpetrator could no longer deny the facts. The defendant's voice broke entirely. I set the fire," he confessed, words spilling out in a tremor of panic and fear. "I didn't mean for it to get so out of control. I panicked. I lied about everything." The courtroom collectively exhaled. Gasps, murmurs, and scribbling pens filled the room. The confession confirmed the child's testimony and Ranger's behavior in a way that was irrefutable. The careful construction of deception, lies, and alibis had been dismantled completely. Ranger nudged Amelia gently, as if to reassure her. His massive head pressed against her small shoulder, signaling that justice was within reach. Amelia's lips quivered, tears running freely, but she felt a surge of courage. The child and the dog had done what months of investigation could not. They had forced the truth into the open. Judge Harper's gavel struck the bench, commanding silence. "Let the record reflect that the defendant has confessed to setting the fire and attempting to conceal his actions. The testimony of the child and the behavior of the K-9 have corroborated these events. The court will proceed accordingly." The jurors exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some nodding, fully aware that they had witnessed an extraordinary moment in legal history. Amelia's courage, Ranger's memory, and the defendant's unraveling had created a scene that no one would forget. David Lewis, the prosecutor, allowed himself a brief, satisfied nod. The breakthrough had been unprecedented. Months of investigation, evidence collection, and witness preparation had culminated in a moment of undeniable truth, a truth revealed by the courage of a child and the loyalty of a dog. The defendant slumped in his chair, pale, defeated, and utterly exposed. He had counted on deception, manipulation, and the legal system's limitations to shield him. But Amelia and Ranger had dismantled every defense, exposing his actions with precision and clarity that no human testimony could replicate. Judge Harper exhaled, tapping her gavel lightly. "This courtroom has witnessed extraordinary events today. The child's testimony and the K-9's behavior have brought hidden truths to light. The defendant will be held accountable, and the proceedings will continue under this new understanding of events." Amelia whispered to Ranger softly, "We did it. We told them the truth." Ranger's ears twitched, his massive head nuzzling her gently. The bond between them, forged through loss, loyalty, and shared courage, had achieved the impossible: justice for her father, exposure of the hidden crime, and validation of the memories carried by a child and a dog. Outside the courtroom, reporters clamored to capture the extraordinary story. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with awe, tension, and disbelief. No one present would forget the events that had unfolded: a child and her father's loyal K-9 confronting a criminal, forcing a confession, and revealing the truth in a way that transcended conventional law and procedure. And as the gavel's final echo faded, one undeniable truth hung in the air: justice had been served, not through documents, witnesses, or evidence alone, but through courage, loyalty, and the extraordinary bond between a child and her father's dog. The courtroom was heavy with silence, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. After the defendant's confession, confirmed and amplified by Amelia and Ranger's extraordinary testimony, the atmosphere had shifted from tense anticipation to awe. Every juror, officer, and observer seemed suspended in the weight of what they had witnessed. This was not merely a trial. It was the culmination of courage, memory, and loyalty, the living embodiment of justice itself. Judge Harper leaned forward on the bench, her expression a mixture of stern authority and quiet reverence. "This court acknowledges the bravery of Amelia Brooks and the exceptional behavior of K-9 Ranger. Their courage and fidelity have brought to light truths that would otherwise have remained hidden. The defendant's confession has corroborated their account. Justice will be served accordingly." Amelia's small hands trembled slightly, resting on Ranger's thick fur. The dog's massive head pressed gently against her shoulder, a silent reassurance. She had been terrified when this trial began, thrust into a room full of strangers, facing the memory of her father's death. Yet now, through determination and trust in Ranger, she had revealed the truth. She felt a mixture of grief, relief, and pride that churned through her like a storm. Outside, cameras flashed incessantly, capturing the extraordinary courtroom scene. Inside, every official, officer, and juror recognized the profound gravity of what had occurred. Ranger's presence had been more than symbolic. It had been transformative. His loyalty, memory, and instinct had confirmed and revealed truths that no human witness alone could testify to. The defendant sat slumped, pale and defeated. The realization that his carefully constructed lies had crumbled was evident in the slackness of his shoulders and the tremor in his hands. Every strategy he had deployed to evade justice had failed. He now faced the consequences, not just of his actions, but of underestimating the bond between a child and a dog, the force of instinct and memory, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. Judge Harper's gaze swept over the courtroom. The jury will now deliberate on the sentencing. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances, the bravery displayed, and the unbreakable testimony provided by both a child and a K-9. Let it be noted in the record that today, the scales of justice were influenced not only by evidence but by courage, loyalty, and memory. Amelia's Aunt Margaret reached over to hold her hand. "You were amazing, Amelia," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Amelia looked down at Ranger, whose eyes met hers with an understanding and quiet pride. The dog had carried her through grief and fear, through courage and revelation, and now the outcome was finally within reach. The jury returned after hours of deliberation. Their faces were solemn, reflective, and changed. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended ordinary courtroom proceedings. The foreperson rose and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we find the defendant guilty of arson, deception, and endangerment leading to the death of Officer Daniel Brooks. The evidence presented, corroborated by the testimony of the child and the behavior of the K-9, compels this unanimous decision." Gasps and whispers swept through the courtroom. The defendant's shoulders sagged, eyes wide, his fate sealed not by conventional evidence alone, but by the extraordinary revelations provided by Amelia and Ranger. The weight of justice, long delayed, had finally fallen squarely on the guilty party. Judge Harper's voice was steady, commanding attention as she delivered the sentence. "The court hereby sentences the defendant to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for his deliberate actions that resulted in the loss of life and destruction of property. Let this serve as a reminder of accountability, courage, and the consequences of deception. Justice has been served." Amelia sat still for a moment, absorbing the words. She glanced at Ranger, who nudged her gently, his warm presence grounding her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief, pride, and triumph. She had faced unimaginable grief and fear, yet through courage and loyalty, she had ensured that her father's death would not be in vain. Officer Mark Evans, standing beside Ranger, allowed himself a quiet exhale. He had trained the K-9 for years, but he had never imagined his partner would play a role of such significance. Ranger had acted not just as a dog but as a living witness, a guardian, and a force of truth. His behavior had shifted the course of the trial and ensured that justice had been served. Margaret hugged Amelia tightly. "You were so brave, my little hero," she whispered. Amelia rested her head against her aunt's shoulder, feeling the weight of her journey, the loss, the fear, and the ultimate triumph. Ranger's head rested beside her, his warm breath and steady presence a silent testament to their shared bond. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, reporters and bystanders eager to witness the extraordinary story. News cameras broadcast the events live, capturing the unprecedented courtroom drama. A child and a dog confronting truth, exposing lies, and ensuring justice. Social media erupted with accounts of the case, headlines lauding Amelia's courage and Ranger's heroism spreading across the nation. The defendant was led away in handcuffs, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. He had underestimated the power of innocence, loyalty, and memory. His actions had been exposed in a way he could neither deny nor escape. Justice had prevailed, not solely through law or procedure, but through extraordinary courage and fidelity. Amelia, Margaret, and Ranger walked out of the courtroom together. The afternoon sun bathed the steps in golden light, highlighting the small, determined figure of Amelia beside the massive, loyal form of Ranger. Photographers snapped pictures, but Amelia barely noticed. She was focused on the presence beside her, the living, breathing reminder of her father's legacy. Officer Evans patted Ranger's side, whispering, "Good job, buddy, you did it." Ranger's tail wagged slightly, but his eyes remained protective of Amelia. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged in grief, fear, and unwavering loyalty. Together, they had accomplished what few thought possible: justice for Daniel Brooks and the revelation of truths that would never be forgotten. Margaret hugged Amelia once more. "Your daddy would be so proud of you," she said softly. Amelia glanced up at Ranger, whose eyes seemed to reflect understanding and agreement. The memory of her father, his guidance, and his love had lived on through his daughter and his loyal K9. They had honored him in the most extraordinary way imaginable. As they stepped away from the courthouse, the nation watched. Social media buzzed with admiration, awe, and disbelief. The story of Amelia Brooks and Ranger, the child and the K9 who had confronted deception and revealed the truth, spread like wildfire. Children, parents, and law enforcement alike marveled at their courage. News outlets called it the trial that redefined justice, the bravery of a child and a dog, and a story of loyalty, memory, and truth. Inside, the courtroom remained silent, a space forever changed. Judges, attorneys, and officers would recount this trial for years to come, not for its procedural elements, but for the living testament to courage, memory, and unbreakable bonds that had unfolded before their eyes. Amelia and Ranger had proven that justice was not merely about documents, witnesses, or procedures. It was about truth, loyalty, and the courage to confront it. Later that evening, as Amelia lay in bed, Ranger curled protectively at her feet, she thought of her father. The grief that had once weighed so heavily on her chest was now tempered with pride and relief. She whispered softly, "We did it, Daddy. We told them the truth." Ranger's ears twitched, and he lifted his head, letting out a low, contented growl, their silent acknowledgement that they had fulfilled their promise. Margaret watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. "You were amazing, Amelia," she said softly, "braver than anyone could ever imagine." Amelia smiled faintly, glancing down at Ranger. Together they had faced fear, grief, and uncertainty. Together they had revealed the truth. And together they had honored the memory of Daniel Brooks, ensuring that justice had been served. News reports continued to circulate, spreading the story nationwide. Social media users shared Amelia's bravery, Ranger's loyalty, and the unprecedented courtroom events, inspiring millions. Schools, law enforcement agencies, and families marveled at the extraordinary partnership between a child and her K9, a bond that had transcended ordinary understanding to achieve justice. Judge Harper, reflecting on the trial later, remarked privately to colleagues, "I have presided over hundreds of cases, but this was extraordinary. It redefined what courage, loyalty, and truth can accomplish." Her words encapsulated the sentiment of all who had witnessed the events unfold. And so, Amelia Brooks and Ranger returned home, forever changed, forever celebrated, and forever bound by the extraordinary journey they had undertaken together. Justice had been achieved, not solely through law, but through the courage of a child, the loyalty of a dog, and the enduring power of truth. The legacy of that trial would endure for generations. A story of love, loyalty, grief, courage, and justice, told again and again across the nation. And at the center of it all were Amelia and Ranger, a child and a K9 who had confronted fear and revealed truth in the most extraordinary way imaginable.